All right. Oh, it works. Great. So, great to see you all here. Just going to start. I'm Psykon from Mercury. Hi, everyone. I kind of do a lot of animation, effects works, graphics, things like that, for real-time and non-real-time. And I kind of like to talk about those topics. Post-production, visual effects, special effects. And I thought for this talk that I combine this with another obsession of mine, which is Godzilla and the Godzilla movies and all the stuff behind that. So, asking why I thought it would be a good idea. So, first of all, the franchise spans 70 years of movie history. So we can stay one place and look at the different decades. We can also look at clips with giant monsters and lasers, which is always a big plus in my opinion. And we also have the situation that quite a lot of the movies we will look at are more situated in the low-mid budget area of filmmaking. So it's not just like one boundary-breaking movie after another. It's also a lot of just real day-to-day movie-making stuff to look at. And of course, I hope to give you some facts to be more fun at parties, because who doesn't want to crash a discussion about Japanese movie monsters with actually? So, hope to do this here. I'm going to start with just introducing the character of Godzilla. So, first of all, of course, Godzilla is a thick and chunky atomic lizard. And the important part is the atomic, because that stays constant throughout all the movie and through all the franchise, while a lot of other things about this one particular lizard changes over time. And basically, the start of the character is in 1953. When Toho movie studios located in Japan needed an idea for their yearly big movie. Two things kind of came together. One was there was a pretty successful movie from the US called The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which featured a giant lizard attacking a coastal town. This was done completely with stop-motion animation. So that was one part. Another thing was what happened about around that time was that there was an incident in the Pacific Ocean where the crew of a Japanese fisher boat suffered severe radiation poisoning due to the atomic tests done by the US in that area. This kind of came together, and different people at the studios kind of create this idea of, well, let's focus on this topic about an atomic monster, because that's something that is on the mind of a lot of people, and kind of combine it with this ideas of just the monster movies, which were quite popular at the time. One thing though, they had, because another plan for a movie fell down, so they had 6 months to do the movie, which was released in 1954. And we're gonna look at some clips from that one. See Godzilla? Just one note about the movie, if anyone now got hooked up and want to see it yourself. Saying it is quite a dark movie featuring a lot of dark topics which may not have transferred through these clips. Just be prepared for that. The topic of atomic trauma is very real in this movie. But now let's talk about History of VFX. And I want to prelude this just with a note that until we get to the 2000s, we're really speaking everything about effects works. We're working with film, with physical medium. Just saying that at the end, everything that happens and people are working on needs to come to a chemical reaction in the film itself, so we can have a picture that we see in the theaters, which also involves things like copying stuff, things like that. On note of the effects themselves, at this stage, we can categorize them into mechanical and optical effects. There's also like a third category, which would be animation, stop motion animation, painted animation, which is for now out of scope for this talk. I have to keep it short enough. But mechanical effects are everything that you can put in front of a camera and film directly, like what we see on the left. This is usually the fastest and cheapest way to realize an effect. You have something, put it in front of the camera, you need a burning building, you build a model, and you light it on fire. Also, of course, again, as I told you before, movie needed to be done in 6 months. Stop motion was out of the question. They calculated it, and it would have taken about 7 years to do all this effect with stop motion at the time. So they resolved to the now famous rubber and silicone suits, and also hand puppets. Because every time we've seen Godzilla opening his mouth or moving his head, it was a hand puppet, because the suit was not capable of those kind of motions, at least at the time. And also, while it may be the fastest and cheapest way to do an effect, it wasn't the easiest one, because the full suit for Godzilla, for this movie, actually weighed 90 kilos. So the actors playing in the suit, they sweat buckets in an already hot studio environment and with fire around them, and they moved a 90-kilo suit around with them. So it involved a lot of sweat to do this kind of effects. Of course, also things like we saw right at the beginning with the earthquake shot. Of course, it's also a practical effect. You can have a set, you can do something with the set, it becomes categorized as a mechanical effect. On the other hand, we have optical effects. And optical effects basically are everything which you cannot simply film. Which would also involve this last scene, which was a fade-over. But you can't film a fade-over from one scene to another. You have to create this kind of effects out of camera by usually combining different pictures, different scenes, which brings us to early compositing, or composition of 2 or more elements in film. Like we saw with this shot, which again is the hand puppet that was used, combined with footage from running people, and then there's a line right when it goes the back, where 2 are combined. Now, the simplest form you could create this composite would be to utilize one feature of film, that you can expose it multiple times. If you only expose a part of the image the first time. So you could film the scene on the hill with the people and mask off part of the gate where the light hits the film, like this diagonal way. Then take the film stock, put it in the camera in the studio with the hand puppet, and invert the masking, film it again. You could create this shot, and a lot of early effects works before that was created that way. But of course, you can't revert in that situation. So any issue which would happen would be permanent. You would have to film everything again if something goes wrong. This was kinda, or one way to get around this was with a machine like this. This is from a bit earlier stage. That's called, it's an optical printer, or like this category of devices is called an optical printer. And its first use case was simply to duplicate stock of film. You want to have one or want to create two of them, you can use an optical printer, because what it basically is, it's a film projector on one side of the device and a film camera on the other side. But with this setup, you can duplicate stuff, but also it means you control the speed of both devices. You can control the exposure on both sides, and you can put stuff in the middle. So all this work with masking things off, only exposing one part of the film, then another, maybe even a third. You can do this out of the studio in the laboratory, and you create your effects this way. And until we get to the digital age, pretty much if you had to combine any form of two or more images with film, you use the form of optical printer. Also, of course, the mask that was in the middle, that could be a static image, which was a lot easier, or for really complicated things, you could hand animate a mask, which would be between them and also be played in the same speed, which was, of course, really, really expensive and time-intensive to do. So most of these early compositing shots use static masking. And probably this comes all together with what I call building a shot, which is the whole process behind creating a shot like this that we saw. Different teams which you need to work together. You have to know what you want to show, how you want to show it, and then you think, well, that's what I want to show. How can we achieve this? For example, Godzilla needs to be big and mighty, so you film it in a higher frame rate. When you combine the images, it gets played slower, so you have this little slow motion effect, which also transpires to the debris you see on the bottom and the smoke effect, which gives this kind of illusion. Of course, you have to already know how the people will traverse the scene, things like that. And then you also, of course, apply little tricks. For example, the one shot we saw with the melting power poles. You could use stop motion again, but not really efficient. So what they used here was they built their models out of wax and then put a really strong, warm, hot light to them so that it started to melt. And if you look close, you can actually see the wax dripping down. This was 1954, was quite a successful movie, also got an international release. Some followed, only one followed in black and white. After that, we get into color, and we're now in the 60s. Godzilla changed quite a bit in that time frame, from really like a dark theme of exposure to radiation. We now get into this range, which I think especially a lot of from my generation remembers, which are giant monster wrestling matches, usually combined with some form of science fiction theme and alien invasion. So you have a lot of rocket and spaceship models, things like that. So let's watch a clip from that. Audio? So, there are a lot of the same principles at work here, especially with this like building a shot. Then you want to show something and you have to think about how you can realize it. And just want to focus a little bit because I always liked this shot here at the end where, well, we want to show on this island. So there's this one part where it's just fade over from people playing in suits to this shot with some static puppets. If it works well enough, you can achieve this, because otherwise it would have been a gigantic set, which probably wasn't available. So, yeah, again, thinking about how can we achieve this, just good enough with the resources that we have. But now, some new toys are around to play with, because we have reached color film, which allows for also effects done through color. And one thing would be Chroma Key, or blue and green screen effects that we're also quite familiar today. Because I mentioned beforehand, doing an animated mask to composite images was really, really time intensive. But when you can split your image in different parts, maybe through color, you can use the process of exposing the image through colored filters that only the part from this color area will be exposed on a film. And so you can automate the process of building your mask, which is basically how all these blue screen or green screen, and there was also yellow screen in some parts, film, were achieved. And it allowed for shots like this, especially with people being composited into a shot, because this would be kind of astronomically work intensive to create beforehand. With the process, it was possible. Another thing we saw in this clip beforehand were all effects done by process of rotoscoping, which, in general terms, is painting over the image in some form or another. Rotoscoping can be used to create masks, but it was also especially heavily used for all these effects with laser shots, with energy beams, things like that, which also allowed that the people could work quite fast doing that kind of thing. I've put here the image from the US patent of the rotoscoping process and the mechanics behind it, because the whole process was patented until 1939. Just shows again how much also movie making resolves about maybe getting around patents or waiting until they are not patented anymore. And this process was also used heavily throughout 60s, 70s, 80s, up until the 90s. Basically, anytime you see some form of energy weapon, beams, things like that, it was person painting that stuff. And it also replaced the physical mist of Godzilla's atomic breath that we saw beforehand, which was, physical mist. First, it was combined together with rotoscoping, and from 1964 onwards, it was completely done with rotoscoping. Speaking of painting on film, I want to put your focus on paintings in general, because that was a really, really big part of doing any kind of effect works or any form of showing something which isn't physically there, or which isn't there in real world around it. This one big like wrestling match scene, you saw this picture in the background of Mount Fuji, which really was one giant picture in the back of the studio, painted by one artist. And basically, anytime you see in those kind of shots, you see the sky in the background, it's usually just a painting. And again, if it works good enough, if it works well enough to give the illusion of a background, of a sky in the back, works. And people painting for movies was a big part of creating those movies at the time. Just wanted to focus on this. Then from the mid-70s onward, there were a really sad time of about 10 years where no Godzilla movies were released. Up until we go to the mid-80s, where those studios then thought, well, kind of let's do a reboot. And now we have a new generation of filmmakers, and they were quite nostalgic for the 1950s Godzilla movies. So again, took a bit darker tones, but still incorporated quite a lot of this wrestling match energy that we had. And I'm going to show you two movies from the early, clips from two movies from the early 90s. And yeah, let's see what might have changed. If I get
It's approaching at great speed. Okay, zoom right in.
So yeah, obviously film stock got better. We have a bit better image quality. Cameras got a bit better. There's also quite a few things stayed the same. You still have the static shots with a static mask doing the compositing because they were affordable to do this kind of shots. But I think one of the standout features from that time period was all the advancement done in just general electric control, in microcontrollers, in moving stuff remotely. So on the left is the actual animatronics for Godzilla's head in the 80s, which also is that time frame where we see the suit actually articulate some form of response in the eyes, in the face, because of this new technology which came up. And also in a similar way, pyrotechnics. We saw quite a few and especially bigger explosions, and those clips, thanks also to the advancement in actually controlling them, because still, this was all in a studio, and you need to be able to control the kind of mayhem to make a good practical effect out of it, because you never want to endanger your artists and people working on them. This control also transfers, of course, everything we saw before. For example, optical printers could be a lot more nuanced and detailedly controlled, or you could add a lot more sources together. So also this kind of effects got a bit more complex. Another thing we saw rising in this time frame, we're still in the world of film. At the end, we need to have one roll or two rolls of film for the theaters, but we see the introduction of a lot of techniques utilizing video. So this is the time where like military control room changed from a wall of blinking lights to a wall of monitors showing different kinds of graphics and animations, because while animating that kind of thing for film directly was really expensive and usually you try to get around it, if you can just use your Amiga, create few of those graphics, animate them, and put them on video, because video is in the end simply electronic signal on a magnetic tape, you can realize quite a bit more. That's also why you see, for example, a lot of shots where the film camera will actually film a monitor showing some kind of animation, which was a middle ground. You had the possibility to do that kind of animation, but didn't have to use the expensive, time-consuming process of printing that kind of thing to film directly or incorporate it into this. So yeah, just wanted to focus on that, because quite a lot of just the theme and the feeling comes from the stronger utilization of video effects. This went on until 1994 or 5. Then, yeah, those movies weren't really bringing in any money anymore, which was always a bit of an issue. But there was a American film studio which was interested in the license. So those studio thought, well, yeah, let's let those guys do something. It's around 1997, 8. Jurassic Park was a few years back, so, well, we have all this great new computer-based technology to create this, which obviously worked. So basically the idea was, let's apply this to Godzilla and make like a real Hollywood Godzilla movie. I'll show you some clips about them. I want to prelude this with that this creature we see here in this movie, while the movie is actually part of the greater Godzilla franchise, and this creature is recognized in the fandom as part of this universe. It's actually not recognized as Godzilla itself. It's called Zilla in the greater fandom, and I will come back to this. But let's just enjoy some big lizard action.
This is not good.
So yeah, one would probably obviously like ask the question, well, was this new technology an improvement? I would say, yeah, absolutely. Interestingly, the first half of the movie features a lot of great shots. There was also a lot of practical effects involved into this, but yeah, giant monster in rainy New York just works and are great shots. But you also have this last part of the movie where you see really obvious issues. Just with the rendering, the shadows are not correct, the reflections are not correct, things like that. I would say this probably comes back to, first again, communication between teams. You have to know really in the beginning what everyone needs to do. And it maybe also is just a bit of hubris of, well, no, we'll just do it and we can fix all of this in post because we have all these new tools and technology. But it also shows that this often is not really enough, and you can run a lot of issues. Also, you just saw the good version of those effects, because when it was released in theaters, those effects looked different, because they had an issue where the film stock for which the images was rendered was not available. They had to use a different one. So it was an issue of analog color management, which just made a lot of these effects look quite a bit worse in the theatrical release. And they corrected a lot of that for the Blu-ray version. Just, again, goes to say, color management pretty much in all parts of life is just an important story. I won't go too much into like all the, well, how are the CGI effects done, because I think all of you are quite knowledgeable when it comes to polygons and rendering techniques. But I wanted to focus on one thing which stood out for me. As far as I know, this is like one of the first time where this specific topic comes up. So again, a few years back, Terminator 2, Jurassic Park, things like that, you had a lot of R&D involved creating custom tools for that kind of movies. The 1998 Godzilla movie stood a bit out because everything was done in Softimage 3D at the time, and it was quite heavily marketed at being done in Softimage 3D because 4 years before, 1994, Microsoft bought Softimage, and they ported it to Windows NT. So these are a few of the first like press releases that I can gather where a piece of software is actually advertised with, well, all these effects in this Hollywood movie was done with that kind of software that you can simply buy for $8,000 and install on your Windows NT workstation, and basically you can do Hollywood things at home at your desk. I thought it was just like an interesting piece of history behind the software, which was used to create a lot of that. Yeah, quite similar as we also see, of course, with recording industry a few years earlier. Yeah, just want to focus on that. Sadly, I couldn't find a screenshot with the actual Godzilla model in Softimage 3D. I would have liked that, but I was not able to actually find it. And also the renderer, Mental Ray, which was used for the effects, was also part of the software package. So you could really get basically the full package, including metaballs if you bought the deluxe version. Yeah. Next up, the movie was quite successful, but not as successful as they wished for. Classic Hollywood story. But it caught the interest of Toho studios back in Japan because, well, seems like there's still a market for it, and now people internationally are interested in Godzilla. So they did a reboot with Godzilla 2000 in 2000, and led to some additional movies, which are called the Millennium series. And of course, all this technology, also digital change, also was introduced into this kind of movies, which is why I like to call this the Godzilla the After Effects era. And I will just show you clips from one movie, the last movie of the series, from Godzilla Final Wars, which was released in 2004. Which, I'm just going to play it, and you can see all the mid-2000 madness. One thing to note, while there was a lot of CGI effects in those movies, Toho still restricted everything, all the monsters shown in the movie, and because it was for the 50th anniversary, they featured like 13 different giant monsters. It was still done with practical effects and suits, and with few notable exceptions. So, yeah. Up. Yeah. If anyone wanted a visual representation of practical effects versus CGI, so there you have it. Also, just a fun fact about this. This movie didn't get a release outside of theatrical release outside of Japan, but they had the premiere in Los Angeles, and they invited all the creative team from the 1998 Godzilla movie to the premiere. Was it time for edginess? I think. Yeah, I just wanted to show you that, and I also really like the movie because it's basically a studio-produced fan movie, so to speak. But yeah, this was again the last Godzilla movie for Toho until 2014, where the license got to Legendary Pictures, and we got a new American Godzilla movie, which actually also in the fandom is Godzilla because he's thick and chunky and atomic. And got, of course, King of the Monsters and Godzilla vs. King Kong. And what I think is interesting about like this part that we are in right now of visual effects is that there's this barrier between mechanical, practical, optical effects and animation is kind of melted together, because beforehand, really animation was its own medium. And it was also usually a practical or optical effects didn't really have so much to do with animation. Of course, in stop motion, often things got a bit complicated. But yeah, right now we see like just melting together of all of the effects. And I could show you some clips from those kind of effects spectacles. But I wanted to focus on another film from 2016 called Shin Gojira. Because after the Legendary picture was quite successful, Toho Studios thought, well, there seems to be an audience again. For example, let's reboot it. So they did and made a movie quite similar in tone to the original 1954 movies, just being 60 years apart. And for the next clip, where we'll show stuff from Shin Gojira, which was made by quite an interesting team, I will combine this or prelude this by some more clips from the original 1954 movies, because they try to achieve something quite similar in tone, and I thought it would be an interesting experiment just to see those two parts together. So, yeah. Which brings me to some closing words, because of course I wanted to make a point out of this. We saw the different filmmakers, different special effects team, trying to achieve something quite similar, but being 6 years apart and having very vast different sets of tools at their hands, and also different approaches. I would still say that in their context, both approach works quite well, because I think we also need to see what's actually being told or transpired with those images. Because of course the central theme is Godzilla and the destruction involved, but we also have the theme of the burning city, which is always in the background, is always present in these shots. And it is about, especially in this film, about it is a lot about terror and despair that the movies try to invoke. And brings me back to what I told about building a shot, because I think regardless of the tools you use, if you really ask the right questions about what is it that I want to show, and what can, with those resources that are available to me, and this can be wax models and cardboard models and rubber suits, or it can be digital models, digital compositing. But for both of this approach, you have to ask the same kind of questions about what is it that you want to show and how can you achieve it with those tools. And yeah, I think really a lot of the whole history of doing showing fantastical worlds, showing fantastical effects. The whole history about it is about people just going through that process. And we can see that, yeah, whenever there's some new technological innovation, people will use it. If there's some new tool that's in your budget, you'll try to use it. But we can see some, first of all, it's always what do you want to show, because maybe, yeah, the only thing you really want and need to show is some Chinese monsters beating the heck out of each other, because you're basically trying to sell toys. Or, yeah, maybe you want to invoke a certain specific emotion in people, and you use this. And for me, the history behind it and what I wanted to show you was basically, yeah, there are a lot of people utilizing this, asking those questions, and sometimes it works out really well and you can get something timeless. And sometimes maybe, yeah, you just need to get a job done and move on to the next. Yeah. Any questions? I think you have some things to take it. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned before the millennium era in the 90s that although the effects were there, that they put like a veto that the monsters should be in rubber suits still banging each other, right? What was the rationale? Was it the toys that they reflected more closely to these rubber suits, or?
I would say one of the rationales was because there was a fan base for those kind of movies. Another rationale was because, at least at that time, it was a lot cheaper to still create simple practical sets and effects than trying to recreate like CGI effects for which there was a budget of $100 million US. This was mostly out of the questions. Interestingly, with Godzilla 2000, it suffered quite the same issues of the 1998 Godzilla movies without utilizing CGI, because you have beginning of the movie, which really features great practical effects, great compositing, really great shots, and then somewhere the effects just lose quality and the compositing is off, and which I would say is probably due to similar issues, just not having enough time to really plan out those shots and working together, rushing things. I think it's quite interesting, but I would say mostly it was just budget constraint, but there was still a big enough fan base for those kind of movies with practical effects that it was still viable to produce those movies. Any more questions? Or did that answer your question? Good. Yeah. There's quite a few franchises. Not all of them as long-lived, but it's a vast world to explore if you want to get into that kind of thing. Yeah. Thank you.